Welcome to episode 14 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined in virtual studio by my good friend and my just the guy that I rely on for sanity in navigating these troubled times, the one, the only, John Scott Sloat.
Matt, what's happening today?
Well, this is our second go-round with the virtual studio. And I think, from what I can tell, I think last week worked out all right. So it's preferable to be in the actual physical studio, face-to-face, having our conversation. But we will make do with our virtual reality studio here. And we want to be honoring of our government authorities.
Yeah, and I think we're on week 3 of quarantine. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, it's, I think that, we're experiencing the same sort of disconnect that I think a lot of people are in terms of often struggling to remember what day is this?
Yeah.
Since most of the days feel and look similar. Also by this point, you've also run through probably most of the, we could rewatch this show, or maybe we could start this new show, or we could watch this movie, or you kind of burned through the game collection in the house probably by now. And we've also done a decent bit we did some painting of the trim and in the house, and deep cleaned the carpets and the upholstery, and also replaced some blinds. So, after a while you start to run out of some of those things. But I think we're doing all right. The warmer weather helps. The warmer weather, getting outside, really helps.
Yeah, I think last week was difficult just because it rained, it was cold, and this week's been a lot better already because the sun's been out. Although it stormed last night, I think the sun's supposed to come out this afternoon. So
yeah, that absolutely helps. So we certainly encourage you to connect with us on Twitter at V&S as well as you can email the show variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. And I don't know, John, have you checked? Have we gotten any new reviews or ratings?
I checked maybe 10 days ago, a week ago. I haven't seen anything new. So, but we'd love to see some new
we would
reviews.
Absolutely love to see some new reviews and ratings. And so if you have a chance, go ahead and do that for us. It does help people who don't know about the show find it. But in terms of what we're going to talk about today, again, since the world of sports has largely come to a halt, there's not a lot to talk about. I think you had mentioned before we went on that the Masters is rescheduled. Is that right?
Yeah. I heard yesterday that the Masters rescheduled for November, which is I think a fascinating time of year to have the Masters in Augusta, Georgia. So that should be pretty interesting. And I think the British Open, which is a golf tournament, canceled yesterday as well, which I didn't know it was still planning to play until yesterday. So
yeah, I suppose that when your prime minister goes into the hospital ICU area, that's probably
that's crazy, isn't it?
That's probably a sign that maybe you shouldn't be playing. But
that's anyway, wild.
Yeah, it's pretty strange times. But
Boris.
One thing that is in the realm of sports that I thought we could talk about briefly is the fact that apparently the NBA, now I'm not sure this is official yet, I don't think it is, but they're discussing hosting a horse tournament. And so, John, why don't you explain to our listeners who may not be as up on sports, what does the game of horse entail when it comes to basketball?
Yeah, so basically, horse is a game where one person, you 2 to however many people you want, one person hits a shot, and then everybody else has to hit that same shot. Otherwise, they get a letter. And if they spell the word horse eventually by missing a number of shots, they then lose the game. And there's different iterations. You could play pig or horse, or we used to play monkey if we wanted to play for a long time when I was a kid.
Right. So When you were a kid, did you have a go-to shot in horse, or a set of go-to shots, or what was your strategy in general?
Yeah, well, as I didn't play basketball growing up, so my strategy, because I wasn't a good shooter, was always to have weird shots that other people wouldn't normally take. So over the backboard, bouncing it off the ground, hitting it off the house, anything like that. Anything I could do to just make it weird. I was trying to do to make the shot so that people who could actually shoot and could actually play basketball couldn't practice it or see it coming.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good strategy. I think having one or two kind of go-to shots that are a little unusual can be an excellent way to overcome perhaps a difference in sort of pure shooting talent.
And if I was playing against somebody that didn't know me, I would just say, "Oh, this is left-handed, by the way." And as a left-handed person, it was very easy.
Yeah.
But I would just sort of do that over and over again until they caught on that I was left-handed.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Yeah. So nowadays, when I play horse or pig with my own sons, who are one just turned 22 yesterday, and then one's going to turn 19 next month. So obviously, I've lost the athleticism advantage long ago at this
Mm.
stage. So they like to do shots that are a little beyond my athletic ability at this stage, in terms of things like toss it off the backboard, catch it in the air, wrap it under your leg, and then bring it back up and shoot a layup. That kind of stuff where it's like, come on, guys, seriously, like.
But, the advantage you have is I think you're a better shooter than both your sons. Is that fair to say?
Now that's a hot take, and you will probably get some pushback from both of our boys about that statement.
The last thing to go is shooting. The last
That's
thing to
true.
go in a person is their shooting.
That's true. And typically, one of my strategies is I will shoot bank shots from weird places that most people don't shoot bank shots from, and that's
Mhm.
always a way to get a cheap letter. Typically, in those kind of games where it's, there are certain angles on the court where bank shots are normal, right? But, there are other places where it's like no one would ever try a bank shot from here. But when you can consistently make it, that can get you some cheap points there.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good strategy.
So in this competition that the NBA is contemplating, they're going to have players competing, uh, not in the same gym, but each player is going to be in their own home gym doing the shot, and then so they compete. I think it's just going to be one-on-one, so it's going to be set up kind of like a tournament, I think, where you play one other person and then you keep advancing. So
Yeah,
yeah, that'll be interesting.
how can we guarantee they're not just taking multiple takes to make this shot?
Yeah, I don't know if the NBA is going to step in and sort of guarantee the integrity of the process. I'm not sure,
They're going
though.
to
It would
institute replay reviews and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I'm
though it
sure they'll
wouldn't
make a lot
surprise
of
me, because
bureaucracy.
you know there's going to be gambling on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vegas is going to set lines, and they're going to, yeah.
There's always gambling. Yeah.
So yeah, and this is not the first time the NBA has done something like this. Like back in the late '70s, they had I think I think it was, I can't remember if they played pig or horse, but the same idea, obviously. So there's old footage on YouTube between Pistol Pete Maravich, who was very good at sort of trick shots and ball handling and that kind of stuff, playing George the Iceman Gervin, who was a really long, explosive athlete. And so just interesting little competitions like that. But really, they tried it, I guess, in like 2009 and 2010 at the All-Star game and decided to scrap it. But now we're at a point where people are so desperate that
Yeah.
they're going to
And
try this.
well, and I think a sign of our desperation is I saw ESPN have it, like I got alerts on my phone from ESPN about WrestleMania or,
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff like that, stuff that just does not interest me at
No,
all. Um,
no.
and I'm like, whoa, we're starved. We're hurting as a society.
Yeah.
for some
Yeah.
sport.
I mean, last night should have been the national championship game.
Yeah, I thought about that as I was driving yesterday. That yesterday would have been the national championship game.
Yeah. And we would have been able to crown our first various and sundry podcast bracket challenge winner.
Yeah, that's so sad.
It is sad. It is sad. So we briefly talked about this before the show, but do you have somebody that a current NBA player that if you had to go with one guy, who would you go with? In other words, you got to pick one guy to compete for you in a horse competition from the NBA. Who you
current
going with?
current player, as in April 7th, 2020. Current player.
Yeah.
Okay. Probably I'm taking Trae Young.
And why is that?
I think Trae Young's a lot of fun. He's a good shooter, and he's going to hit some. I think I could imagine him practicing some weird and wild shots.
Okay.
How about yourself?
Yeah. Now I think this is my initial take. So maybe upon further reflection, I'd go a different route. But Trae Young was a little out of the box there. That's an interesting pick. I might go with Kyrie Irving.
Okay. Okay. Is he hurt right now? That's why I said April 7th.
Okay. Well, let's clear the deck in terms of injury. Is that going to change your pick? Is there an injured player that you were going to go with that?
Well, I might go with Steph, but Steph Curry, but I'll stick with Trae. I think Trae's interesting.
Yeah. Part of the challenge though is you got to have somebody who's a good enough shooter.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to have somebody who can knock down shots, but you also got to have somebody who's athletic enough who can do most anything in terms of like fancy kind of ridiculous behind the backboard layups, between the leg kind of, it's not just a dunk competition. So, it's got to be somebody who has that well-rounded kind of hitting just ridiculous shots, but also being athletic enough to do stuff. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see if that.
So, are you taking Kyrie in that? Is that the final pick?
I think so.
Okay. I don't know who would win. Kyrie certainly has an edge athletically, although I think Trae might be a better shooter.
Yeah, I mean, where Kyrie's going to get in trouble in that kind of matchup is the Trae Young just out there shooting 35 footers,
Mm-hmm.
and Kyrie is a capable 3-point shooter, but he's not in that league in terms of like, step back to 30 feet and just consistently knock down shots like that. So.
I heard an interview with Trae Young this week, or I heard about an interview, might be a better way to put it, on Shaq's podcast, where he mentions that he's going to be a better shooter than Steph Curry in a couple years.
That Shaq's going to – no, Trae Young is.
Trae Young.
Okay.
Trae Young said Trae Young was going to be a better – no.
Okay.
Shaq. No.
That's a good clarification. Okay. Yeah,
and
who knows?
I just don't think that's possible.
Nah.
I mean, Steph is like one of the all-time great shooters.
Yeah, as much as that annoys me, yes, I think that's probably true. So,
just interesting.
Anyway, so as we're recording this on April 7th, we are in the week leading up to Easter, and so when it comes to our main topic, we thought that it'd be good for us to discuss the resurrection. And also, it seems like with so much going on with the coronavirus, and then even last week we talked about lament. I thought maybe it'd be a good idea to talk about something that had a greater possibility of brightening people's day. So
inject a little hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, let's just start with when it comes to the resurrection. Let's talk briefly maybe about why does it matter? Like, let's just start kind of big picture. Why does the resurrection matter? And so, John, if you were having a conversation with someone, let's say, this is obviously very hypothetical these days. Let's say you're on an airplane and you're sitting next to someone, since this is you, I mean, this is totally you, right? You're the guy that strikes up the conversation with the random guy.
Yeah, I'm much more of a pop in my earbuds, listen to my audiobook or podcast
Yeah,
for a flight, and want to drink my ginger ale.
sure. Okay,
But
well then let's frame it as somebody asks you. So somebody sitting next to you is the guy who's asking the bunch of questions and is, trying to find out what you do, and finds out that you work at a theological seminary, and he asks you, okay, so why do Christians make such a big deal about the resurrection?
yeah,
What would be some of the things that would come to mind as part of your response?
yeah. I think my natural place that I go for the resurrection is Romans 6. That in 1 Corinthians 15. But why, in answering why do Christians make a big deal of it, the answer is the resurrection does a couple of things. It shows that Jesus has conquered death and sin, right? Where the crucifixion was the payment, the propitiation of sin, the atonement, right? The resurrection shows that he has conquered this, that he has conquered sin, that he has conquered death, and has returned to life, and not just life, but new life, right? And
Yeah,
so while we have died with Christ, the resurrection shows that we will one day be like him. We will he is the promised first fruit. So the victories we have right now over sin are things that we will eventually experience in full down the road, in new heavens, new earth.
yeah, yeah. Good.
Anything you'd add?
Yeah, I think there's I think that uh the key piece obviously is the victory over sin and death, um, but also really there's a sense in which it is God vindicating Jesus' identity.
Hmm.
Uh, it is the Father vindicating that Jesus is who He says He is, and that His claims to be able to forgive sin, and that He was truly the sinless one. That as He was dying on the cross, that it wasn't His own sins that He was paying for, that He was in essence innocent of the charges. He was innocent of uh, the charges that would lead to death. And so it's the Father saying uh, Jesus was in fact innocent, and that He was who He says He was. And so those are kind of key pieces that I always come back to as sort of the authenticating um, Jesus' identity. And it's interesting that even when you look at some of the other key passages on resurrection, obviously you mentioned 1 Corinthians 15, which is really, in one sense, kind of the one-stop shop for resurrection. Though there are several
Really
other
is. Yeah.
key passages that we'll probably bring up here in our conversation. But what's striking is that in that passage in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul essentially hangs everything on the resurrection and says, if the resurrection isn't true, all of this stuff about Jesus, all of this stuff about the kind of life that we've been talking about, how you should live, all of this stuff about forgiveness of sins, all this stuff about a new humanity, about a new possibility of way of life, about the Spirit, all of that is meaningless if that resurrection did not happen.
And I believe that happens in the context of the Corinthians having debates in their own town about whether the resurrection was going to happen again, correct? Whether this was something that had happened or would happen.
Yeah, and I think that it seems like perhaps maybe there were some in and around the Corinthian church who were uh, who may have stressed maybe just that it was a spiritual resurrection,
Hmm.
that it wasn't a physical bodily resurrection. And so and part of that plays into the ancient Greek culture where there was a pretty common kind of dualism that spirit was good and matter or body was bad. And so a common Greek way of thinking was that death freed the soul from the prison of the body. So if you have that mindset, when the early Christians came along and said Jesus was raised from the dead bodily, you could see how there'd be a disconnect of why would anyone want that?
It was category defining, and of course Christians adopted that, right? Maybe not Christians, but uh, there was a particular heresy in the first century that adopted that, known as Gnosticism, right? That sort of adopted that dualistic mindset and thinking.
Yeah, yeah, and eventually even Docetism came along in terms of the that Jesus only seemed to be human but wasn't really human. He only appeared to be that, and so
Yeah, he was sort of a ghost.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So well, let's land there then for a moment. Then let's talk as you think about it. Why does the bodily resurrection of Jesus matter? Why is merely a sort of spiritual resurrection not enough?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, yeah, why does a bodily resurrection matter? Um, well, I think it authenticates the scriptures then as
Mhm.
well, right? In the scriptures, the Gospels present us a bodily resurrection, right? The women went to the tomb, there was no body there, so it presents it that way, and then
And uh, even when he appears to the disciples, Jesus goes out of his way to make the point of, "Look, I'm not a ghost. I'm not a spirit. Do you have something to eat? Do you have something that I can prove to you? I'm physical. You can watch me do something that only applies to a physical body."
yeah, yeah, um, and then I would say there's a um, I in a way that he is the prototype for us. He is going to experience. He has experienced what we will experience. So there will be something of a bodily resurrection for us as well.
Yeah, yeah, and even I think it it affirms the goodness of creation, the original goodness of creation, right? Obviously, because of human sin, the creation is under a curse. But the fact that Jesus has a physical resurrection body is in part God's way of affirming that bodily existence is how he created humanity to live. And so it's not, in one sense, it's a direct contradiction to the common Greek approach of the body and matter is bad, spirit is good. The whole goal is to separate the two and escape. And the bodily resurrection affirms the goodness of creation, the beginning of goodness of creation, and ultimately, it is an affirmation that God made us as human beings to be embodied creatures.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, no, that's an excellent point. As we continue to think about this, should we think about this merely as an individual resurrection, each of us is going to get a resurrection body, or should we think about this more corporately as a church or as the people of God? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's really a both and.
Hmm.
When you look at the Old Testament, there very much seems to be a focus. The Old Testament doesn't talk a ton explicitly about resurrection, but in the passages that do talk about it, like Ezekiel 37 and Daniel 12, there's very much a corporate element that it's the people of God together being resurrected to experience eternal life together, not just as individuals, but ultimately in the context of a community.
And what are some of the benefits of thinking more corporately about that versus I think Western people like us have a tendency to focus on the individual resurrection, but not the corporate. What are some of the graces and benefits of a corporate resurrection?
Yeah, so I think that in some ways it is linked back to what you have in the garden, where you have God creating humanity in His image, and so as a result of that, the idea that God created us to live in community as part of His original intention, I think, uh, should help us to understand that when it comes to resurrection, it's something that uh, we experience it together as well. Let me put it this way: I think it's one of those things where it's the totality of our experience as the people of God together is greater than the sum of the parts,
Mm.
and such that when we are part of a community, our experience of resurrection will be much richer and deeper than it would be if it's just sort of conceived of as individually.
Yeah, no, that's a good word.
But one thing that when I think of resurrection, that I think sometimes we don't often recognize enough is the sort of already not yet dynamic of the resurrection,
Yeah.
and the fact that according to passages like Romans 6 and even parts of John 5, that both of those texts make it very clear that there is very much a real sense in which when a person becomes a follower of Jesus, when they're born again, that is an act of resurrection. They are taken from being spiritually dead to being spiritually alive. And so anyone who's had that experience is already spiritually resurrected, that they have been raised from the dead spiritually. They were spiritually dead in their sins and transgressions. God made them alive with Christ. And so there's a sense in which when I talk about the resurrection with people, what I try to help them understand is that we've already been spiritually raised from the dead. So when we talk about waiting for our bodily resurrection, in essence, there's a sense in which we're waiting for our physical bodies to catch up with our spiritual nature in terms of being raised from the dead.
Yeah, and I think I'd encourage everybody to go read Romans 6 and just see that interplay a little bit, to see how the verbs change, right? About the discussion of we will be resurrected, and we will, but there is a sense in which we have died and we have been buried with Him, right? And so we are dead to sin, and we will be
Yeah.
raised.
And even in some ways, it might even be clearer there in John 5.
Hmm.
If you read through John 5:19 through 29, Jesus talks about both the already and the not yet dynamic of resurrection. That he basically says something to the effect of, "An hour is coming and is now when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of Man, and they will come out to life," basically. And then there's a part later in that passage that talks about how Jesus says there's a day coming in the future when everyone will be raised, whether some to judgment and some to eternal life. So there's a both and there when it comes to our present spiritual resurrection and our future bodily resurrection.
Doc, any particular podcast you'd recommend about the resurrection or about
Wow.
this coming Sunday?
Wow. So that's quite the put it on the tee for me there.
Is that
I
a loaded
appreciate that.
question?
It
Yeah.
is. It is. Yeah. So about 4 years ago, I was interviewed on the Ask Pastor John podcast. That's the podcast that John Piper does. He's interviewed by Tony Reinke. And back in 2016, they invited me to talk about uh, the title that they gave it was 10 Ways Easter Changes Everything.
So you had to come up with 10 ways. You didn't get to say, well, I only have 7 or 6. They said you must have 10.
They asked for 10, so
Wow. Okay.
I did come up with 10. So if you go on to the Desiring God website or even into the Ask Pastor John archives, that's episode 822.
We'll put the link in the show notes as
Yeah.
well.
And actually, that whole week, they did a series of podcast episodes on elements of Easter, the resurrection, etc. And the one after me, episode 823, was an interview with Don Carson. So, you know,
Guys, right there together, you and Don.
right after me, you can get even perhaps an even better perspective from DA on that. So,
Wow. Wow, Don. Wow.
yeah, we'll put the links up for that. But when I think too of the resurrection, um, one of the pieces that I often reflect on, I think a lot of us do, is what is the nature of that resurrection body going to be like? And I think both of us have been in enough teaching contexts, especially with students, college students, but even in the church, where you get those kind of questions, right? Like, so, okay, what is my resurrection body really going to be like? And so I think that's always an interesting kind of exercise to reflect on. Do you have any thoughts as people ask you about that? What are your some of your go-to answers or?
Yeah. My go-to answer is off the bat. I just say, I don't know. I'm just like, I'm not here to speculate. I don't really know. Um, so that's sort of my generic answer. I mean, it's yeah. I think we see some things from Christ that are interesting, right? Like how he gets into rooms and some of those sorts of things that he eats. Um, so yeah, I think some of those things are really interesting, but I don't know that I have my stock answer is just I'm not really too sure. What
Yeah.
are your stock answers?
Well, I think it's good to start there. I think looking at 1 Corinthians 15 and the gospel accounts of Jesus' resurrection, I think it's helpful to highlight a couple of things. The first is that uh, there will be points of continuity between our current physical bodies and points of discontinuity. And so,
Hmm.
1 Corinthians 15 makes the point of um, the sort of the seed to the plant kind of analogy, where if you look at the seed of a plant, rarely can you ever determine exactly what that full grown plant is going to look like, and yet
Sure.
it legitimately comes out of that seed, so it's not completely different, right? And so I think that uh, there will be continuity, and I think you have to be careful with what sort of taking what you see about Jesus and applying it all the way to us. Like, I'm not convinced that we'll just be able to um, go through walls and locked doors and just sort of physically appear in that kind of context. I think that might be something specifically reserved for Jesus. But it is interesting to me that Jesus' own resurrection body still has the scars
Yeah.
of his crucifixion. And so that makes me wonder, so will we have marks from our earthly life that will carry over onto our physical bodies in the resurrection? And, you know, I think that's possible as sort of memorial statements of God's work in our life through the experiences that brought that about. Um, Another common question that I think I get a lot from students is, how old will we look in these
Yeah.
resurrection
That
bodies?
great question. No clue.
No
That's
clue.
that's that's my answer to that as well. I just don't know.
I mean, on the one hand, I don't think that we're locked into looking the age that we are when we die. So, in other
Hmm.
words, I don't think infants that die are going to be
Are locked
infants
in as infants. Yeah.
in the resurrection. And so, um, but at the same time, it's easy to sort of speculate in terms of, well, what's the sort of idealized age? Is it 25? Is it 30? Like, who knows in terms of what that looks like. And even you think about Jesus, right? His disciples initially didn't recognize him. Now
Mhm.
it's hard to know how much of that was God just sort of shielding their eyes, right? So there's that element of it too. Um, but I think that probably the last thing that I'd want to circle back around on in terms of the resurrection is that God raising us from the dead is part of his larger program of transforming creation itself.
Hmm.
And part of what I just keep coming back to is the fact that scripture, and in particular Romans 6, regularly stresses that, and Romans 8 as well, that the same resurrection power that brought Jesus back to life is at work in our lives in our battle against sin and in our battle against unrighteousness. And that's a, when you think about what kind of power does it take to raise someone from the dead, that is just stunning. And to think that that same sort of resurrection power is at work in our lives on a daily basis to enable us to pursue godliness is a great source of encouragement, I think, as we even move into this week where we're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, that the resurrection is not just something for the future. It's something we experience its power now in our everyday lives. And that should give us hope in the midst of challenging circumstances like we face today.
It should give us something to look forward to, but you're right. It should also give us the confidence that the power of the Spirit, the power that raised Christ from the dead, really stands behind us in our battle against sin, the devil, and the world.
Absolutely. And so, uh, on that note of hope, I think that's a good place for us to end on that. We'll throw some we'll throw that link to the Ask Pastor John episode in the show notes, and maybe even we can get that tweeted out sometime this week as an encouragement.
Yeah.
But we're to the point now, since we're at episode 14, where we have to talk about our athletes that we're naming the episode after.
And 14 has not been a popular number.
No, it was so
No.
disappointing as to do the research on this and
Yeah.
realize that, there are numbers where we had so many options. And, then we get to 14 and really the options are pretty thin, right?
Yeah. Well, and we're really working with three options
Yeah.
in the main category. And I believe you have a couple of Buckeyes on
Yeah,
there.
when it comes to Ohio State, probably the two number 14s that stand out, Bobby Hoying, great quarterback for the Buckeyes in the mid 90s. He was the quarterback for Eddie George back in the mid 90s there.
Had to get the
And
ball from
then
the center to the running back.
that's right. Though he lit it up through the air.
Okay.
He had some good receivers to throw to. But KJ Hill, just graduating this year, also wore number 14, is leaving the school as the all-time leader in receptions. And so great player for the Buckeyes there. But all right, who do we have on the in the main category here, John?
Well, three main guys, and then I just thought of another one I'd like to add.
Oh, wow.
I know. Well, we have Vinny Testaverde.
Yeah.
And so Vinny played, and it's he kind of goes back and forth between 14 and 16.
Yeah.
It's kind of all over the place. I'm willing to bet we have more options with 16. So I'm not too worried about him getting picked twice, but
no.
He was 14 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in that lovely creamsicle uniforms that they used to wear.
Yes.
Which I've heard some cry on social media for coming back to those creamsicle uniforms. So you never know. And then so he did that with the Bucks. He was 16 with the Jets, 14 with the Patriots, and I believe 16 with the Panthers.
And part of what's remarkable about him, he had a great college career, but part of what makes him unique is the fact that he had such a long NFL career.
Yeah.
I mean, he played into wasn't he mid 40s, like 44, maybe 43, 44 when he was still.
I believe the Cowboys brought him back for like half a season or something, or, they had their quarterback. I think it was Quincy Carter maybe went down and they brought him back to replace Quincy. You remember Quincy Carter?
Yeah.
I
Sure.
think that was it, but I'm not sure. Okay, so Vinny is one. I believe they called him the Magician, right? Wasn't that his nickname?
Yeah, that's news to me. I don't remember
Okay,
that, but
okay, okay. I remember a TV commercial. Anyway, next 14, and this would be controversial to choose. Pete Rose wore
yeah,
14,
Mr. Hustle.
played for yeah, and his hustle was second to none
Which,
on the
when you think
field.
about it, I mean, his nickname was Charlie Hustle, right? And then that was given to him because of his on-field play. You know, he would sprint to first base even when he got walked, right? But
Yeah,
then, of course, you discover later that he could have been given that name for other reasons.
hustling. Yeah,
Hustling, yes, in the gambling sense of
yeah.
obviously he was banned from baseball for gambling, and not just gambling in general, but gambling on baseball while he was the manager of the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah, and I think yeah, it was, and he's kind of come out as a sleazeball probably in the
Oh yeah,
West. You know, he did an ABC interview in like 2000 or something like that, and it did not go well. And recently though, with the immunity given to the Astros, he's written a letter to Major League trying to get back into the Hall of Fame, which
yeah.
you know, and then our third guy, which frankly I'm a little, other than his name, I don't know too much about, Bob Cousy, who played basketball for the Celtics in the when did he play this 60s
50s.
50s.
Yeah, 50s into the early 60s. Yeah, that's a little before our time.
I looked at some pictures of him earlier. He looked like a very fundamental player.
Yeah, but that was kind of true of that era, right? I mean,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
you know, he's he's listed at 6'1", 175, which,
Man,
you know,
powerhouse.
when you look at when you look at today's players, obviously not many 6'1" guys are super successful today. And if they are, they're crazy quick, or they're like lights out shooters or something like that. So anyway, um, who you got? Who do you want to go with here?
Well, I want to drop in my last one.
Oh, that's right.
We will not pick him,
Okay.
but there was a quarterback for the New England Patriots other than Vinny Testaverde that wore 14, and his name, I can't remember his first name. His last name was Grogan. Remember Grogan?
Steve Grogan.
Steve Grogan, and I have a story about Steve Grogan, but we can't tell. I can't tell it on pod, so it's got to be an off-pod
Okay.
story. But it involves. I was at a Steelers Patriots game, and somebody was wearing a Grogan jersey, which was a
Okay.
deep cut, and and somebody yelled something very inappropriate at this Grogan person.
Shocking. At a football
Yeah,
game,
yeah,
inappropriate language. Yeah, that's
yeah. It
surprising.
was, and it was in a drunken stupor as well. So it
Also
was
surprising. Yeah.
yeah, it was very funny, but I can't repeat it. Yeah.
All right. So who are we going with here, John?
Well, Bob Cousy feels a little before our time, and frankly, it's your and I choice.
And he's
Pete,
also a Celtic. Let's be honest.
yeah,
Neither of us
yeah,
are Celtic fans.
no,
Which,
not,
by the
no.
way, I've been rewatching. We rewatched the 30 for 30 three-part series on the Celtics and the Lakers, and that just reminded me of every additional reason why I can't stand the Celtics. But anyway,
I struggle with Pete Rose because of the intense gambling and sleaziness that
yeah,
emanates from him.
yeah,
And so it feels like the safe option and maybe the vanilla option is Vinny Testaverde,
yeah. I think
which I
you're
might be
right.
okay with today.
I think you're right. I think you're right. So, one thing you liked this week. What do you got for us?
I think, as I've talked about on air, I just moved into a new neighborhood, bought a house, and I've set up my home office, and my home office overlooks the street. And so I have this neighbor, and my neighbor is the one thing I like this week. I have not met him, um, but let me just give you a description. He has a big flagpole in his front yard, and he has a big American flag hanging from it, and right underneath it is a Jamaican flag.
Okay.
Um, and so I think my understanding is his wife is Jamaican,
Okay.
although I have not seen her. I've only seen him, and just has this big childlike grin on his face anytime he walks outside. And at 7 o'clock every night, he walks outside and starts playing loud music through speakers that he has set up in his garage. So I'm hearing like top 40 hits right now playing. And I was sitting here the other day and he started flying a drone around the neighborhood,
Okay.
taking pictures of people's driveways, because we had the children of the neighborhood went and used sidewalk chalk in everybody's driveway. And I was talking to one of the other neighbors, and apparently he's been doing a lot of construction, and he's working on his Christmas decorations for next year
Wow.
already. So he's just kind of been entertaining to watch from afar. And I've also been told that he dresses up as like a flying monkey from Wizard of Oz, and will like scare neighborhood children with it.
Oh my
And so he's
gosh.
kind of just a big kid, and it's kind of been fun to watch from a distance. But I don't know that I want to get too close.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my
Well,
one thing I like this week. What about
yeah.
you?
Well, mine doesn't quite compare with that, but with the warmer weather, I actually have been out in the driveway playing Around the World with my sons. Around the World is another sort of basketball game, if people aren't familiar with it, where you have to make a shot from different spots around the basketball court. And yeah, it's just been a lot of fun. They have been winning more games than I like out of that.
Oh,
So actually, John has been winning probably the most games of that.
wow.
So yeah, he'll appreciate that shout out. But it's been fun to compete with them. I did win a game the other night where I had to come back from way behind, hit a hot streak of hitting, probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 shots in a row to go from, on in trouble to a stunning comeback victory. So that's my one thing I like this week.
Okay. And in comparison to Bob Cousy, I just looked up Trey Young,
Yeah.
6'1", 180.
Okay.
So he
Okay.
was bigger than
Interesting.
Bob Cousy, but barely. And they're probably fudging that. He's probably 5'8" and 140,
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I'd say mission accomplished here, right?
Yeah.
We've covered our various and sundry topics, and so I think it's time for us to say until next time, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.